Hi guys, in this video we will change and determine the cause of malfunction ignition coils. What is an ignition coil? For a fire to occur, a spark is needed to ignite the air, fuel mixture in the engine. This is the function of ignition coil. It's an electrical transformer that converts the low voltage of the battery, usually just 12 volt, into a very high voltage, so that a spark can slip through the spark plug gap to ignite the fuel. As a result, the engine starts. Same system requires only one coil, but most new car models have a separate ignition coil per cylinder. But before starting the video, subscribe to our channel, put like, and don't forget to put a bell so as not to miss a new video on the channel. And breakdown are the following: possible causes of breakdowns. Actually, the reason for the failure or malfunction of the ignition coil are varied drivers, but there are also favorite among them. First of all, low watt candles are distinguished. Save on a candle, plug on a new rail, and in general, the quality and completeness of combustion of the fuel-air mixture largely depend on the candle, and therefore savings are hardly appropriate here. Overheating of the engine, and especially a situation when the engine boils, can also cause of ignition coil to fail. Therefore, if such situation arises, be aware that such a problem may appear. Mechanical damage to the rubber tip of the engine coil can cause breakdown. In such case, replace the tip will completely eliminate the problems. Well, more exotic reasons for the failure of the ignition coil include flooding the car with water and starting another car with faulty wiring. But here all the electronics and electrics of the car can already fail. The repair of the ignition coil, in addition to already mentioned replacement of the tip, is actually not performed. Indeed, who will ruin the rail when it's easier to change it? Therefore, if it's the ignition coil that has flown, then you should immediately prepare to replace it. Since the ignition coil is responsible for generating the spark that starts the car's engine, any malfunction of the coil will quickly affect engine performance. The following signs of malfunction of the ignition coil can be distinguished. Check engine light is on. Since a defective ignition coil will directly affect ignition performance, any malfunction will cause of the check engine light to come on. Increase fuel consumption. With a decrease in the spark power, the fuel combustion process will not be so effective, which will lead to a noticeable increase in its consumption. Package in the exhaust system. Often an earlier sign of ignition coil failure in backfire, which occur when fuel that has not been burned in the combustion chamber enters the exhaust system. If the problem is not corrected, the exhaust system can be severely damaged. Stopping the engine. A failure ignition coil will intermittently supply current of the spark plugs, which can cause of the engine to stall. It can also make it impossible to start the engine. Ignition misfire. Insulation power from one or more cylinders can cause engine misfire, especially during acceleration. Problem with starting the engine. Likewise, if one or more of the spark plugs are not supplied with sufficient charge, the engine will be very difficult to start. Car with one ignition coil may not start at all in this case. In principle, there are several methods for checking the health of the ignition coil, but not all of these methods are safe. For example, it's advised to start the engine and disconnect wires from each cylinder in turn. This will determine which coil is failure. but such diagnostics can seriously damage or even disable the electronic engine control unit, and then the repair will be much more complicated and, most important, expensive. You can take resistance measurements, and a broken coil will give readings that are different from other and even from the norm typical of the system of this car. Well, professionals have special equipment that allow you to scan the entire electrical system of the car and determine where the breakdown or failure is hiding. The latter method, although somehow costly, is completely safe for the car. If the problem is not the coil itself, but in the wiring, you can simply start the engine in the dark, raise the hood, and watch where the sparks slip. But this is, as it were, not good about the coil. If the ignition of the coil body is broken, then the spark discharge will flow the path of the least resistance, that is, the current intended to ignite the fuel mixture in the cylinder will go to the nearest metal pod connecting to the mass of the car. The engine will react to misfire as follows. While unstable idle, the movement of the car will be accompanied by jerk. It will be difficult to start. There will be dips during overclocking. Pops are possible in the exhaust and inlet system. But these are symptoms of a dying ignition coil when it hit ground, but still works. In the event of complete failure of the ignition coil, the symptoms of the malfunction will be different, depending on how many cylinders it serves. In conclusion, we can say that the serve life of the ignition coil is influenced only by condition in which it operates. Change candle and wire in time. Don't flood the engine component with water. Monitor the condition of the electrical equipment, and with possible, you will never have to change the coil. That's all, guys. Subscribe to our channel and put like, and don't forget to put a bell so as not to miss a new video on the channel.